Everyone, thanks for coming and hanging out today. We are on the last day of SQL Bits. So out of curiosity, who's been here the whole week? Who is their first day here today? Excellent, a little mixture of both. So I appreciate all of you for coming in. I'm really excited, and I do want to spend a little bit of time just with introductions today, because I've done 1,000 of these webinars with some with this topic, a lot with many others. But the thing that's unique certainly is the fact that we're all in the same room together right now, and I think that's just a lot of fun. I've been able to do this again after a couple of years, and I definitely really enjoy just the vibe of hanging out in a room full of people. So I do appreciate all of you coming out, and just the fact that we can now actually do this as things are starting to come back to a little sense of normalcy, at least in some parts of our life. Obviously consider everything that's happening in the world recently, but it's going to be fun today. We're going to talk about a lot of cool things related to buttons and bookmarks and visualization and design. It's kind of the thing that I like to specialize in. Some of you might be familiar with me, maybe some less so, but my name is Reid Havens, and I can give a little spiel about myself. A few of you might recognize the avatar that I've used on YouTube now for a few years. Fun thing with that I was just talking about here a minute ago is that actually was inspired by another little avatar guy, the Nerdicorn, who's another company from Ben Weissman, who's also an MVP here in the area. I saw this and I was inspired, like, man, I need to brand myself as well as this guy does. So ended up finding a fun way to do that for my YouTube channel. But I focus a lot on aesthetics and design. I am an MVP, so I honestly do kind of everything under the sun when it comes to Power BI and modeling and everything else. But the thing that I lean in towards is how to do unique visualizations, fun, creative ways to utilize stuff. Today, we're going to learn a lot about interesting ways to utilize buttons for a lot of things besides something to click. But that's kind of where I just like to put my focus on, and I have a lot of fun kind of playing around in a sandbox with the design elements around those things. I do quite a bit of development. I've done training for years. I've been doing Power BI and modeling stuff in like Excel almost a decade now, and I also teach at the University of Washington in Seattle. But I definitely get my I vibe the most when I'm able to hang out in a room full of people and just hang out and teach. So I really do enjoy these kind of events quite a lot. So again, I appreciate all of you for coming today. But let's talk a little bit about what we'll actually be going over. So with any of my presentations, I like to make them very scalable. When I'm doing things like Past Summit or SQL Saturdays, I'm able to do like 90 minutes to up to 2 hours. I've had times where it's down to like 30 minutes. Today we'll effectively probably have 40 to 45 minutes of demo time. We'll get through as many of these as we can, but there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff that I'm going to go through, including ways to utilize hover effects, creating slide toggle buttons. I'm not going to list everything, but this kind of gives you an all-encompassing thing that we'll be going over, and then anything that we can't. I will also have supplemental links that you can then go to later today, check out my YouTube channel, find some other cool, interesting stuff. The last thing I'll mention about that is one thing that I've really I love doing in the last year or so during COVID is started doing live streams. So every week, I actually do a weekly live stream. Friday mornings, my time, so that would be Friday evenings, your time here. But I bring on lots of different people from the industry, tons of individuals that can just come on and think of it almost like a meetup group, but just on a weekly basis where there's really cool topics that I like to present on. And I'm usually the one sitting next to it being a moderator, but also just eating popcorn as I'm hanging out and getting to learn cool stuff. I've done 62 at this point. I thought I would run out after half a year. Like, there can't be that many people who both are experts in Power BI who can also present, but I can just continue to find more and more with that. But also to that note, if at any point any of you do present or have topics like that, I'm always looking for new individuals to kind of help stand up and give a platform to. So I'm always happy to hear ideas of opportunities to bring people on just to share something interesting about Power BI or something related to the Power Platform. So feel free to talk to me afterwards if you yourself have any ideas for that, or if you know anybody who you think might be a good fit to come on to one of those. But with that, let's just kind of dive into the demo and have some fun today. And last thing I'll mention is I got some swag here, lots of little Power BI things. I got a Power BI bank, or Power Bank, a Power BI beer opener, which probably is the most important one, and plenty of cool stickers that I printed right before COVID, so I haven't had a chance to give out for years, but fun little laptop stickers with the avatar that I built that are up at the table you can grab at the end. And I'll try to remember to throw these out as I'm asking questions. But let's start with the question here, just onto the page. Which of these are buttons? And give yourself a second to think about that, as I'm also moving some things around under the page. So we're clicking around here. We have some cards that are onto that, but it's a little bit of a trick question. The fact is everything that you see on this page is, in fact, a button. They're just buttons that can be highly configured in a lot of different ways. So they're a very versatile item that can be used in Power BI. I've used them both as visualizations, even as far as like actual buttons goes, like the FAQ. Doesn't really look like a traditional button, but it is still having the hover effects and the click effects that are happening here. Even this one, the little sliding toggle, doesn't really look like a button. So we can and will explore a lot of different ways that you can configure and customize these to utilize them to add a little bit of aesthetic flair to your reports. I'm going to go ahead and start with the most recent one. So one that I actually got inspired to do, and one of my favorite ways to come up with video ideas or just things to blog about is when I see another video and like, hey, I love that concept. How can I improve upon it? And this was a concept that I saw another channel do on YouTube, How to Power BI, and really cool idea of being able to have like a hover effect where text moves over, a little bar kind of pops up, and then you also are able to click on it and everything. The downside to it, though, that I saw with this is he was using two objects on the page. He had this button and then kind of a hidden object behind it with a line built into it. But can anybody in here tell me what's a downside of adding more objects onto the page, even if it's shapes or text boxes? What starts to happen to the report? It gets slower. And that you can have the perfect model in the world that has one row on your fact table, but if you have 85 boxes on your page, it's still going to take a long time to load. Web browsers are single-threaded. They load them individually, and it's just going to take time. So anytime I see layering, which sometimes does have a benefit, as we'll see with some other ones here, it's like, all right, well, can I take these three objects that we use to make something? Can we turn it into two? Can we turn it into one? Can I use Articulator or something else to make a custom visual to have a single object? So as few objects on the page as possible is generally what you aim for, just to make sure that the speed is adequate as it can be. So that's what I ended up doing for this one. So let's go ahead and kind of, let's see the result of what these kind of effects look like, and then I'll walk you through the buttons themselves. So the goal of this is kind of creating like a page navigation. When we have two types of buttons, like an active, meaning like this is the current page, which is the page one you see there. And then we also have the ones that can be clicked, and created a little kind of custom menu navigation at the top between all of these. And the navigation experience as you go between each of those is it kind of blends into the page itself, some little design aesthetic choices. But you can see the three button options that we have with each of those. Basically, the static button here, which does nothing. When I hover over it, it doesn't change. When I click it, it doesn't change. The other two have an effect of a hover and a click. So you can at least see from a design process, this is what it would look like as one example built into a report itself. Now let's actually see them kind of broken out a little bit. There we are. So 3 examples of the hover effects, which will both give us some examples of how to explore using the various states, but also some examples of what the active and inactive is. So I have 3 examples onto the page. For years, my initial use of it was color. I would have a button that would have 3 different colors to basically create what it is on the page, what is when you hover the mouse over it, and what it is when you click it. Very common kind of 3-stage process that also a lot of CSS will have for websites, but it gives a person a tactile feel to interact with it. It's not just a button that says click me. It gives the user an experience to engage with it. And it also is for people who are coming into the report for the first time, when they're moving their mouse around, if the color changes, it's kind of an indicator, hey, I can actually click this, I can do something with it. So it does help to indicate that they can utilize or interact with this in some way. OK. And if we open up the format button over here, there we go. Excellent. And if you open up the style pane, you'll see that we have a few different states that are in here. We have the default, hover, and press. The default is, some of you might be aware, maybe some aren't. That's just basically what does the button look like when your mouse is not interacting with it, hovering, or touching it. And 2 other states that are related to that, which is the on hover and on press. And that's the 3 different stages you're getting. The default here, the hover is when I'm hovering over it, and then, of course, the on press is that 3rd one. So between that, if I actually was to move some of these out, there you go, the fill. You can see the lightest color, and then as I go to on hover, that darkens down a little bit. And then finally, the on press gets to be the darkest color there at the bottom. So between all three of those stages, that's how we get to kind of that full interaction effect between them. And at a very basic level, color is the easiest way to do that. Initially, years ago, I used to do some fun tricks actually with the font settings. So you can actually change the font size. So my initial thought with this many iterations ago, before I stopped using 3D effects, is I would actually decrease the font size as I clicked it, so it would make it seem like I was physically pushing the button in. But with most of the rest of the industry, I think people have started to move away from any kind of pseudo 3D looking effects that's kind of very early 2000s, Excel charts and stuff like that. So I've started to use color then basically to create a similar effect, but without having to make it look like there's a visible 3D object onto the page. Now, some of the fun stuff as well, as I mentioned, is the active and inactive buttons that are over here. Between these two, we have a similar effect, but what we're doing is there's a few different moving parts that are happening at the moment. The active button, that's already been set up, but the inactive one, when you hover over it, not only does a bar show up, but the text actually moves over. So two different things are happening, and two different settings have been configured onto that. And then the click effect is just the same perspective that we have in the hover, but now we've darkened the background to actually match the background color in this case. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to scoot you over. There we go. And I'm going to do the inactive. There we go. There we go, OK. The format pane is still, even though it's like coming out of preview now, I will still say that there's some glitches and missing pieces in it. So we're going to see if they've actually patched something that may or may not be in here with the new one. But I will say for the people who have used the old one to the new one, the search box is your best friend when it comes to the new locations, because they moved everything. And in a conversation with some MEPs last night, my favorite analogy of this is, for any of you who've read that business book on like who moved my cheese, this is the cheese that got moved for me, because it's 5 years of rote memory of knowing where the locations are. It's like, that's right, it's in the style section now. But yeah, let's take a look at some of this stuff. So as an example, notice that my text here, this is the padding that I have on all 8 sides. I have 8 pixels over to the right on the default, to give it a little bit of room to move over. So when you adjust these, it actually adjusts how far top, bottom, left, right it moves around. So that's the default. On hover, notice that I've actually increased it to 20. So that's why the text actually scoots over. So it doesn't automatically move with the icon that's in there, but it is being scooted over as part of the process to give room and have it basically have the same distance that it had from the border, now with the icon that's built into there as well. So that's how I'm getting that process to scoot over as far as the text field goes. We also have in here, there we go, the icon. And let's see, custom. Yep, so it is still missing in this section. I'll explain what it is, and also one of the reasons why, after this presentation, I'm going to, again, switch back to the old format pane. But what we have in here is a custom icon that was added last year, which means you can actually import an image, an SVG, or anything else into the button itself to be able to use any type of custom shape outside of the original ones that we had for the arrows and everything else, which have been in here for years. And the custom one allows, in this case, I have loaded a vertical line light that's into there that I built actually in PowerPoint, and I'll show you how to make that in just a second. But it gives you a full creative freedom to use either the shapes that we see in that one. I'm also going to show you in a minute how to use SVGs into there. Can anybody tell me why SVG, or yeah, an SVG image would be better to use than, say, like a JPEG or a PNG? Exactly, it's scalable because it's rendering based off of the vector traces and graphics. So at any level, it's going to be crisp and sharp. I can make this button the size of the page. It's still going to render appropriately. Anything that else like a JPEG, even though you might have, like, let's say, an 800 by 800 one, as it scales up and down, it does get a bit fuzzy. And I've just found that Power BI is not the best at rendering images. So whenever I can, I use SVGs for that exact reason. Now, let me see if I can actually quickly, as I show the PowerPoint of how to make this, I want to see if I can actually turn back off that format button, because it automatically turned on with the most recent update. And here we go, new format pane. I'm going to do this, and I'll show you exactly the thing that is missing from the new version. And I filed a bug with Microsoft, and they were like, "Oh yeah, sorry, we missed that." Like when you're writing down every feature to migrate from the old version to the new version, you'd think it would be a pretty simple process of ensuring that you don't miss a literal button field to migrate to the new format pane, but they did. So it is being fixed, and that's also why it is technically in preview at the moment. So while that's spinning up, I'm going to show you what I built. So here are the shapes that we saw in the buttons. Now, technically, what the shapes are is they're actually squares. Because when you import any image into the icon in Power BI, it does expect like an icon is going to be in a square ratio. If it's not, it's going to stretch it out. It's going to look weird and try to fill into the shape. So technically, the majority of my shape is actually an invisible box that I've included onto that. And in PowerPoint, if you select this, there you go, you can actually see that I have a text box into there that I don't have any fill, I have no border, but I've grouped them together, and then I saved it actually as an SVG. And you'll see once I go into back into Power BI in a minute why I did this, but that allows me to keep the ratio. The line stays at the necessary size it is because I am including it within a larger framework. And the best part about PowerPoint is if you're using any of their native shapes, I can come to this, I can right-click and save as picture, and it gives you the option to save it as an SVG. So instead of a PNG or anything else, I saved it as that. I was very happy when I discovered that PowerPoint can do that. You'd be surprised at the amount of photoshopping that I do in a PowerPoint deck. And one of the biggest reasons is it's obviously very easy for me to do a video on that and provide people these files because not everybody has Photoshop installed. But PowerPoint is a pretty good rudimentary photoshopping tool to create images and other stuff. And my thumbnails for my YouTube videos, I make in PowerPoint. I know I could do it in Photoshop, but it works well enough. And easy to export stuff like that. So you've seen the fact that I have made my custom icon in here. And technically, my icons actually include two shapes. So let's come back to the buttons. Hover effects. OK. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the great question. So the question is, for the audience, is there a specific size that I would want the icon to be? And that kind of is determined by how big it is on the page, because the larger it is, obviously the larger the file size will be. I generally go around like 200, 250 pixels, because the button's never going to be that big onto the page. And that should scale well even to a 4K. But at the end of the day, typically, with the SVG, they're still like bytes. They're very, very small in format versus a PNG or a JPEG. So I generally just size it approximately to what I would want the button size to be in PowerPoint, and then when I save it, it renders perfectly well. Great question, though. All right. So let's do this again. My cheese got moved back. I'm very happy now. There we go. Icon. So this was a big, glaring thing that they forgot to include in the new version. There is no icon placement option that was in the new format pane menu. I looked around everywhere for like, well, maybe it's in another page. And when I actually emailed Microsoft, oh, yeah, sorry, we forgot to include that. So that's what is something that they will be adding in the next preview version at some point. But because of that, it is literally impossible to build this button with the new format pane right now because you can't choose where to put the icon. And typically, with the icon placement, if I did actually left of text, technically what it would be doing, let's do the on hover actually. Here we go. There we go. So if I actually did left of text, it places the whole button. It shrinks it down, and it places everything, including that invisible outline, to the left of the button in there. So I can't actually do that. But if you do custom, what it allows it to do it allows them to overlay on top of each other. They're not actually adjacent, but they're on top of each other. And then at this point now, the distance from the line to the text is determined by the text's padding. So that's how it's able to overlap that, basically the invisible square of the icon, but also scoot it over. So the end result is that technically, while I have to include a square shape for the icon, with that custom placement, I can overlap them and create the needed effect of really a thin, narrow button onto the page. And that one feature is the only reason I can do that, is the icon placement. And then choosing the appropriate margins and everything else for that. So with all of those combined, you get something that's a nice interactive effect, has a unique look and feel to it, and is something that's more akin to what you would find on a traditional web page. But the configurations with the icons and everything else, including all of those placements and design choices, gives you a lot of degrees of freedom to be able to really, really customize the buttons in that sense. And then you use, shapes, so to speak, that don't necessarily have to be a square. You just have to get creative with making it. And again, the number one thing is keeping it in a square format, usually with an invisible object in whatever tool you're building it out in, and then doing the overlap into here to get that final effect. Then the last thing that I did, I'll show here at the bottom, and then I'll leave it open for questions here in a minute, is down here with the current and active page. So similar process that I did to the above one. I'm not doing anything fancy, though, with the placements or locations. Instead, I'm just actually bringing in a square icon that I found online. This comes from a page called Flat Icon. It has a huge repository of really nice, let's say clean, strong outlined various shapes and images and everything else. But the best part is most of their images usually comes with a black and white plus a color version. So that was one fun way that I had kind of active versus inactive. And you can see here the inactive page, nice and just clean, not much color going on. The hover gets a little bit darker. But then I also inverted the colors to make the click effect, and then also toggled the color itself. So then the achieved effect is approximately, go to my other one. There we go. And you might notice a little bit of a glitch as well in the outline of these, but you get a nice little effect going with those, and the color is kind of emphasizing the fact that this is the current page that we're on. What I find a bit frustrating is that these icons, you might notice that there's some outlines to it. That is not in the image shape. That is a rendering issue that Microsoft's having rendering the SVG. There is no border. I have not set a border for the icon in here. The file itself does not have a border in the SVG, but somehow it ends up rendering that when it's pulled it into Power BI. It is a known bug that I've, again, filed with them. I'm hoping at some point it does go away, so it's a small annoyance, just because it does break the illusion a little bit to indicate that there's a square shape inside of the box. And from a design perspective, that certainly does bother me. But hopefully it does get remedied at some point in the near future with that. But you can kind of see, we've seen 3 different ways that you can utilize some fun uses for buttons with the Interesting. Yeah, for both the color that we found out as a very basic level, also using custom shapes that you can build directly in PowerPoint, pretty easily doing this. Again, recommendation as an SVG, or just going to a website and downloading them as well. Many different avenues to kind of create unique and inventive hover effects and click effects for all that. Now, both either from online, if there's any questions, or for any of you in the audience, is there any curiosities or questions you have about any of the button designs before I talk about the next topic? OK. Excellent. OK. Let's go back to here. Another fun example that I want to talk about is this guy down here. And with a lot of these, too, I honestly get inspired either, again, from sometimes just watching a YouTube video and seeing, like, how can I make this better? Or it's talking to a client. This one was a client request that I have, large enterprise company that, for the most part, they would hand me a spec doc and say, build the report to look like this. They've already built the visuals. They've done everything else as a concept. And then they just like, you need to build a model to make this happen. It's like, all right, that's fine. If you want me to be a modeler rather than a designer, I'm happy to just take your marketing team stuff. But they had a report page with a ton of these little toggles to like flip basically between Visual A, Visual B. I want to just switch between column and line. And it's a binary toggle, kind of the little radio toggle that you have on your phone. Like, all right, well, my immediate thought, what about if I use like an image? Maybe I can do like an image flip, because buttons can import into the fill in the background. You can use custom images and stuff to like create a unique looking button. But then, of course, now we have to deal with files. I have to create them, and there's extra time in management. So with a lot of this stuff, and kind of I think in design in general, I try to use as many native features as possible. So it's going to render appropriately, and it's just less headache for me. And then I don't have to teach somebody else how to make this custom image in a Photoshop app if I'm handing this report off to someone. So this was made entirely using just standard objects in the button. I have not uploaded any custom image. This technically is a character that is accessed via a special keyboard that is on the Windows machines as well, the little circle that's in there. So nothing was imported. There's not a single custom image being used in this thing, but it is still a standard button. So let's go ahead and look at this one. There we go. Yeah, so an example that I have here, there's the button basically on the chart, just generic things as an example, but it's the ability to, toggle between those two, and it goes from left to right, and we kind of have the three little states that creates kind of the illusion of it actually sliding over. We technically only have 3 spots it could be in, because we have default, we have hover, and we have the click one, but it has that nice little transition effect when you create that. So that's the end result, and now we can actually look at these, bring these over, and let's break some of these down a little bit. All right. So the number one thing that I've done on this is the fact that we wanted like the pill shape to have it look like an actual toggle versus that. When I built this a couple of years ago, initially, there were not options to actually change the shapes. Now, with the new updates to the buttons last year, you actually have quite a few different shapes that you can use and utilize. So there are many options to actually create some really cool, unique looking buttons. I'm still seeing videos and blogs coming out even today of individuals that are doing some really fun, creative stuff with them. The channel that I actually mentioned earlier, How to Power BI, he's done some pretty impressive stuff when it comes to like the new button, Navigator, and a few other things that I've definitely taken some hints from to make some other stuff. But initially, it was the rectangle, and then the number one thing that gives it that effect is the fact that we can also adjust the rounded edges. I put it back to 0, it starts looking like a boring traditional button again. So adding a little bit of a rounded edge gives you that nice illusion of being able to then create that kind of pill effect. Pretty straightforward, but it's starting to edge towards the shape that I'm wanting to create. Now, the thing that this one, obviously, is the text one. So again, I was trying to think about how to build this out. I need like a button, for them to click inside of it, something to drag and drop that looks like a little sliding toggle. I initially was thinking, all right, well, with ASCII, there is that little black dot that you can have as like a, to be able to do a bullet or something like that. I did initially attempt to use that, but it was just simply a black dot onto the page. I could change it to maybe white or another color, but this one I like because it's not only the white dot in the middle, it has a nice clean outline. It kind of works in line with the other icons that I typically use. That's actually accessed by the Windows Emoji keyboard. It was probably one of the best life hacks that I ever learned for Windows when I discovered this existed 3-4 years ago now. If you do the Windows key and either period or colon, you get an emoji keyboard that comes up, and it's an emoji library for Windows. Like, man, that's useful. I used to Google blank emoji or blank symbol, and then I would fetch it off a website, copy and paste it, and put it into there. Sadly, it doesn't work with Zoom It very well. You get like 2 versions of it. But you can see from here, the best thing too is if I type the word circle, I get all the symbols related to a circle, and one of them, we'll just assume you can see that a little bit closer. There's that little white circle that is in the square, or that is in that button at the moment. So I'm using that, and that's how I'm able to get as part of my title text. And then between the 3 different states, notice that default, right aligned, hover, center, and then on press is left. So all 3 of these states creates that nice little effect of moving back and forth. I love the fact that there's all these alignment options and buttons, but a foreshadowing, but man, wouldn't it be great if the single value card had that same level of editing? That would be a lovely thing, but unfortunately it does not. That's the next demo after this. But there is just so many configurations for buttons that it has a lot of use cases, and of course it's incredibly configurable because of that. So with all of those combined, we created a button that is able to have that nice little sliding effect between the two. Some of you might be also already thinking ahead to maybe some issues with using rich emojis. I will say that they do render a little bit differently depending on the device that you're loading this on. So all of the emoji libraries have a white circle in their library. But Microsoft, their emojis, has those thick, clean black outlines. The one for Apple will have a little bit of a shading shadow on it. The Android ones look a little bit different. So, depending on if it's mobile or if it's just an Apple machine or other ones, you'll still have the button on this, the little circle on the button itself, but it might look just a little bit different on other devices. So it's a small thing, but it is a consideration you need to take in hand when you're doing this. Is just making sure that what device are my clients running this on? Because sometimes, especially with images and anything else, you just want to make sure it looks correct, and that should be part of your typical report testing experience anyways, is making sure it looks correct on your devices. But that is just one consideration, at least. If you end up using something like this versus, let's say, building your own custom button in PowerPoint for the image for this, is just what devices will they be using, and making sure that it looks, it still fits the standard that you want for your report when it's being rendered on the other devices. They are going to often be Windows, but just like a bit of 2 cents right there. Last thing I'll mention is just the color. Pretty straightforward in that. Like, I kind of went from, I just picked a color, I went to a neutral gray in the middle to kind of help transition between the two, and then the other color onto the end. But all 3 of those are, again, just utilizing those 3 different states to create that nice little effect between all of them. This one, though, is pretty straightforward. The biggest, I would think, takeaway is the fact that we can use that emoji library, which does give us access to some fun stuff. I would also say that it's occasionally useful to maybe use it in the title, or you can even actually technically name pages. You can add a little symbol on those. Like, if you wanted the budgeting page, you can put the little dollar symbol next to it and have that little rich text emoji. I would say avoid naming table names and measures that. I have seen people do that and tweet about it a couple times, but then that means all of your DAX code referencing those columns and tables is going to have emojis in them. And from somebody who came from a SQL background, like, oh god, no, I don't want emojis in my code. Titles are fine, but it should be staying out of my code. But it's fun to splash them around on your pages. From online or in person, are there any questions about this before I talk about the next demo? Good? OK.
Just quickly take that back to your actual visual and just make sure that where the bookmarks how it...
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, let me put up these things. Here we go. So the question is, can you just show the button in effect on what it's doing? So the button is designed to utilize the bookmark feature, which is hiding and showing 2 different objects onto the page. So it actually is helpful to show it here. So notice that at the moment, my column button and essentially the chart for the column, they're hidden. So I'm going to come over here and activate the button. There we go. Now the other 2 have been hidden. So that's been invisible, or that's been turned off. And then this is now visible as well. So I basically have created a bookmark that is just toggling the visibility. And that's probably for me, one of the more common uses of bookmarks. It started out initially with a concept of just being a filter macro to be able to apply 5 filters with a click. But I have found that doing visual switching is a really good way of helping add variety and additional comparisons and analytics to a page without cluttering it up. Now, I can have 2 things on top of each other. I don't have to shrink them to half the size to fit them both in the page at the same time. I can go between visual A and B. This is a bad example of separate analytics because it's the same data just in 2 different chart types. It's more of a demonstration purpose. But I have utilized that in a lot of reports where as an example, my Google Analytics report, I have a line chart, and in one version, it has a forecast line that goes out, and then the other version, it is using the new anomaly detection. Unfortunately, they can't be added to the same chart at the same time, but it gives people an option to see the same data, but with 2 different features, with a little toggle button at the top to do that. The other benefit, too, is for performance, because we talked about objects on the page. If it is hidden, it doesn't actually decrease the load time, and the data for it is not being loaded. So you can actually have a bunch of hidden objects, but that will not add to the performance cost until their visibility has been toggled. And at that point, the query for them is executed, all of the elements for the object is loaded and everything else, but it won't actually add an added cost as long as it is hidden in there itself. Last thing that I'll mention, just since we're talking about bookmarks, for a little bit of a pro tip to you guys, bookmarks are, from a user perspective, I think one of the most useful and versatile things you can do in reports. Lots of interesting things to do for toggling and visibility and fun little interactions like menu navigation. From a developer perspective, they are a nightmare because there's very little way to know how what they do unless you document it. There is no button that says show me what it's related to, what it's done, how it's been configured. If you come to a report that was given to you, the only way to know what the bookmark does is you got to click it and see what happens on the page, see what filters change. There are a couple of tools now that actually extract this. So on my live stream, there was recently Matthias did a video on a tool called Power BI Tools, and among all the many things that tool set does, it actually can extract the metadata out, including a documented list of like the bookmarks and then all the things within inside of them. And after a couple drinks and conversations last night, I think he's going to make hopefully an external tool button that actually will let you extract out the documentation for this. So that might be the first tool that will exist that will actually let you get auto documentation for bookmarks, which is something that has been needed for a very long time. But until then, the number one thing that I'll recommend is as you're creating and configuring bookmarks, I would recommend making sure that you're coming up. If you're using selected visuals or anything else, take a screenshot of your selection pane and put that into OneNote or anything else just to help you remind yourself later of what to do. And the other advice that came from another presenter that I was talking to yesterday that I think is a genius feature, have a text box and put your notes in the text box on the page and then put that in the group related to your bookmarks and then just hide it. Keep it hidden. But that now you have basically a documented text box in your grouped selection pane related to the notes you have for your bookmark that is permanently hidden, but at any point, as a developer, you can come in, toggle the visibility, and now you have all of your notes baked directly into Power BI. In a perfect world, there would be an option to be able to come here and go to a description for your bookmark, just like a DAX measure might have in your model, because DAX has this. And wouldn't it be lovely if you could type in a description for your bookmark as well, like you could a DAX measure? But because you can't, that kind of workaround of having a hidden text box somewhere on your report page that describes that bookmark, I think is a really clever feature. So I just learned it yesterday, and I'm 100% going to start using that now as kind of my way of self-documenting. But it's my 2 cents to you is, trust me, you will not remember in 6 months what your bookmark did. If you create it, even with a short name, it's still probably not going to be enough to encompass everything related to it. So that's why I describe it as both one of the best user features. It's a great thing to add a lot of functionality, but it is really not friendly for developers because there's no way to really easily expose what has been set up in it outside of clicking it and just hoping you can understand what just happened on the page when you do that, which is why it's a nightmare when you're taking over a file. And I usually end up deleting the bookmarks and redoing them myself, because otherwise it's a black box for me. Any other questions on this before I wrap up with my last demo, and then I'll do some Q&A as well? OK, cool. There we go. I think I want to talk about using it as a visualization a little bit. So let's talk about this one here. This is, in fact, actually 2 different objects that are on the page itself. We can see that it's actually being utilized to kind of create a custom KPI card. This, again, comes back from that client that I had where they basically handed me a mock-up. And hey, yeah, we already know exactly how we want it to look. We want cards that look like this. All right, well, Power BI doesn't really have a card with a health bar and then all this other stuff. Like all right, how can I make this? This was also before Charticulator and Deneb started to become big on the scene for custom visuals. By the way, if you haven't explored those yet, they are a beautiful tool for bespoke visualizations that isn't too difficult to learn compared to obviously having to script your own JSON code. But for the moment, I ended up creating a layered visual that built this out for them. Layering is fun in Power BI. It's one of the great ways to mash things together to get it to work and function for the end user. So we have here another example of it, kind of a bit more zoomed in. But the goal of this really is I have a value. Depending on if it was above or below a comparison value, the health bar in there is turning green to red. I will say for accessibility reasons, like they didn't care as much, but generally speaking, if I am going to do good and bad as an indicator, I'm usually pairing it with 2 things, because color alone is not a very strong one. But if I had color plus an icon or something else, and technically we have the up and the down arrow too. But usually, if you are trying to to work towards accessibility standards, you typically want to pair shape or symbol as well as the actual color itself, or pick a more neutral color between those 2. But if we actually let's do a little pop out. I'm going to move this over to here. Let's see, select, click. There we go. OK, perfect. I'm going to right-click and ungroup. We actually technically have 2 shapes onto the page. So I have a top shape and a bottom shape that is in here. The top one here, this is, in fact, just a button. The the two elements that are in here is actually the title for a button in the bottom section. Now, when I first did this as a concept, I ended up having 3 different objects on the page. I had a single value card on the top for the number. I included, and I could honestly use a text box or button in the middle, but I choose to use buttons because the annoying part for me whenever I use a text box as a fill shape is this. Because they're interchangeable in a sense, but here we go. I can't get rid of this. That little format thing is always there, and it often covers up stuff that I need to click. So from a development perspective, having a text box on the page, that part annoys me. So thank you. I ended up using a button for this. Now, for sake of time, I'll just quickly mention the bottom thing is a single value card, and the only thing that's in there is a concatenated DAX string that just has a bit of formatting to just basically spit out a readable result. The button thing at the top, though, is the important part that I want to mention, and 2 little kind of clever tricks that I did. The fill that we have into here, instead of a static color, I am using the f of x symbol, which just means that I can take a measure that is returning a hex code and put it into here. I can also create a rule set if I wanted to, but basically I'm actually filling the body of the button in with one of 2 colors for either of those. And I shrunk it down to a size that allows me to get that little bar for the health status that I was in. Fairly straightforward as far as that goes, and I'll just quickly, for consideration, I'll just show you the measure. It's pretty straightforward. I just have 2 variables declared for the colors, and then it's basically a condition to do some logic and return one of those 2. So instead of doing it as a rule in the object, I'm instead just choosing to use the measure itself to contain the logic. That way I can reuse it in multiple ones. I would say the workaround that I had to think about outside of the box a bit is the top part is actually the title. So titles in Power BI can actually be dynamic. It doesn't have to just be standard text. I can, in fact, there we go. I can actually use a measure into here. Now, the one trick is, though, the only measures that can be used in a title must be returning a text output as part of that value. It actually has to be a text data type. I can't put a number into there. So, all right, if I remember, and it'll be the last thing I'll show, and I'll open up to questions. Text, that's right. TXT. Okay. There we are. So as long as you wrap it in a format function, then it takes whatever that value is, and it formats it to the needed result. So the downside is you needed a dedicated measure to do this, but I've managed to take it from 3 objects down to 2. So it's not quite a single object as a custom visual, but at least it is as few objects as I could possibly get to do a very unique, bespoke visual that the client was needing. And I thought it was a unique way to also utilize the title to create the card that is at the top of the section as well. From a performance cost, I will say that 99% of the effort for any calculation is going to be returning that number. Simply formatting it to a different data type for DAX it's pennies, or it's drops in a pond. It's very, very little effort. And there's very little to no cost in have those in your model as long as you are foldering and organizing the measures themselves. But the combined added effect is that we have a unique looking card that is on the page that's all using native visuals, objects, and functions without having to go and do anything fancy or coding any of our own custom visuals. And I think it's a great example of not only buttons and their use cases, but just creating custom visuals yourselves in the report. Now, for sake of time, and I know we're getting close to it, are there any questions on this from any of you or online, as well as also any more general questions that I can also answer as well today? Yes?
We've got one online from Mark. It's a bit of a loaded question.
The best ones.
He wants some best practice advice around having a central filter page or a panel. I guess he's aware that you have to copy the bookmarks, but is there a way to centralize a filter page or a filter panel?
It's a great question. So the question online was, is there kind of a best practice for creating a filter landing page or filter panel? I used to do both of those. So, and some of you from the Excel days might have seen the files where you have a single page that has all of your slicers, and then it syncs to all the other pages. It helps to keep the clutter off the pages and free up room for visuals and stuff. And I used to do that in Power BI too. I would have kind of maybe the first page with a bunch of filters, and then each page would have a bookmark navigating to it and coming back. This was also pre-filter pane era. We didn't have the little filter pane that's in the right over here, which I have it turned off at the moment. So let me turn this back on. But ever since we had this, like the filter pane that's built in, yeah, it's not as pretty as maybe some of the other custom ones that you can do, but it's a lot less effort. So I honestly lean into that. And as from a performance perspective, it loads a lot quicker too, versus having to create and build out a fully custom filter page, or also having a little pop-out filter pane. Because again, I used to build that. I had a beautiful little custom filter pane that popped out of the left-hand side, but that would be multiple objects and shadows and frames and all this other stuff. And we're now adding objects to the page. Now the page is getting slower. So it's just so much extra development time. And then having to create the bookmarks to do it and create the bookmark to pop it out. Shoot, I made the bookmark, but then I accidentally forgot to sync this visual, and that's added to the page. Now it broke. So tons of maintenance that went into that. So like it can be customized and made to be a lot prettier than that default filter pane, but the level of effort is exponentially higher. So it can be done. I just would say that overall, unless that client is really looking for like an embedded report on a website that has to be like this perfect, art piece, otherwise, like, all right, it's going to take me 15 minutes to build out your filters here. It's going to take me hours to build it out if you want all this other custom stuff. Is it really worth that development time? And most of them are like, well, yeah, no, it's fine. We can just use the native one. So like that's kind of where my head has gone for the direction of kind of old school using those pages or panes from scratch versus just leveraging the native features that are built into Power BI. Great question. Any other questions that I can answer? And these can also be about general Power BI as well, too. Yes. So how do you get the emoji keyboard up? You need to be typing somewhere. So let's see. If you hold the Windows key, and then it's either colon or period, that pops up that wonderful little keyboard there that gives you the access to the library. And then again, as you type out any word, if I was to type in circle or smile, it would filter all of those emojis to that. And when you click it, it actually deletes the text and replaces it with said emoji. So it is both in Windows 10. And as you can see, I still have it installed at Windows 11. I don't want my cheese moved again, and there's nothing in Windows 11 that has convinced me I need to install it yet. So I will when they force me to. But I've reached that age where, like, no, I want things to stay the same. I don't want them to change, especially when it comes to demos and other stuff, because clearly we've seen some things can break. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you use the new, I don't know what it's called, the navigation pane or the navigation slots, when it automatically populates the button?
Yes. Yes and no. So the question is, or I'll give the consultant answer, it depends. The question was, do I use this new Navigator button? So there's a page navigator and a bookmark navigator. The nice thing is what it does is, like, as an example, if I click the page one, you automatically get something that's linked to every page. You can sync it between them, and it's a really quick and easy way just to add it. Like, I could technically make a button for each and do all that with more effort. It works pretty well, and you can customize it. I can do the shadows and all the states that sync between all the buttons. The downside, though, to this is that we do not have. We don't have any options for icons. I can change the shape size, so I can make these circles and squares, but I cannot add icons or any custom shapes or images inside of the buttons. So a lot of the interesting things that we can create can't actually be added into here. So the level of customization is reduced a bit. So you essentially get a streamlined navigation experience that can be made much faster, but you do lose a little bit of the customization. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Non-hidden. And then there is a way to, like, I think, configure it. Here we go. You can choose to show hidden pages, choose to show tooltips. So there are a few of those configurations in here. I had another YouTuber, Ben Ferry, the Power BI guy, who was on my channel recently, who pointed out, I think, a glaring missing feature. There is no option to show or hide drill-through pages. And, like, you might have a drill-through page that may or may not be visible, but you can't individually choose to turn those off. And I think that should be one of the toggles, is show or hide drill-through pages, because they're often designed to be navigated from the drill-through, not from the top here, regardless of their hidden status or not. So I'm hoping that they do add that as a feature at some point. It is really great as a really quick and easy way to get stuff built in on your page, but as we've seen, there's just a few formatting and design limitations with them. The other thing that I think they've fixed now that was a little bit annoying is, as I was doing stuff on my page, the toggle to this would change to different ones. So it would like unselect the active page, and the default states and statuses for the buttons would flip around a little bit, and it was kind of glitchy. I think that's now fixed, but that was initially, back in November, one of the issues that I had with that one. It is really cool, though, that it, as you can see, just instantly spits those out. So it's a really easy way to make a navigation experience. We're getting close to the time, so I will open it up to questions, but also want to give you guys some links as well, and some QR codes. All right, here we go. So QR code takes you to my main website. A bunch of links as well that will be available for any of the PDFs on the talks that I give. I have an archived history of all of my speaking events. I think I'm actually now at virtual and physical. I think I've done 76, 77 worldwide at this point. I'm gonna appreciate when I hit the milestone of 100, but also some links to some of the consulting services. And I also do have a course on Skillway, which is ran by MVPs on reporting design and aesthetics. That's about a 4-hour course that talks about a lot of cool things from the report perspective. I also provide a coupon code for anybody who's interested for any of the stuff that I have on my site for courses, etc. It's a 30% off. That's valid for a month, just as a thank you for attending today. If you do like the content that you saw, I would appreciate a follow on YouTube. It does help the channel grow, and it makes the YouTube algorithm gods happy, and they promote the videos more. And there's about 160 videos at this point that I think I have, including on my live stream. So lots of cool free content, and I'm always happy to answer more questions. So feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help with Power BI stuff and anything related to that. I think I'll quickly see if there's any other questions, time permitting, and otherwise I'll be chilling around for a bit to answer any other questions. But any last remaining questions you guys have? You have a question.
So Reid, when you talk about like someone gives you like a report
Yep.
filled with so many buttons with bookmarks, and there's not like an easy way to understand okay, what that bookmark or button is doing. But like in Power BI, there's something like the bookmark slideshow.
The presentation mode thing, yeah.
But it kind of tells a little bit around, because when you turn that on, it kind of tells us okay, what that bookmark is doing, what activity that bookmark is doing. So do you think that solves that issue, or we still need that documentation feature, which could be really great, basically?
Yeah, so there is a little bit through the presentation mode and like an experience online that can kind of help to show what the bookmark is, definitely. But I still think at a minimum level, with some bookmarks, especially that involve the selection pane and filters, some base documentation, whether or not it's a screenshot, the hidden text box that I mentioned, hopefully that new feature that's coming out soon. I do think that I hate documentation. I would imagine most people do, but one of the few exceptions when I actually make the effort to make sure I do document really is bookmarks. Most other things in Power BI, I can add a description or I can do anything else to give myself enough of a hint that future me knows what I did. But really, bookmarks still become a black box. And it's to the point that every time I'm given a report, which is the presentation I'll be doing later this year, it's somebody handed me a PBX file and told me it's broken. They don't really know why or how to fix it, but I need to fix it as the new developer. That is a very common scenario where it has no documentation. I often scrub it out. I start with business requirements and I create a new, and I usually just get rid of the bookmarks and I make brand new ones because I can't trust to update the ones that they have because there's no way for me to dig into them. So it really does help. And a term that I learned from my last job from Rob Colley at Power Pivot Pro years ago when I used to consult for them before I did my own thing. It's the be kind to your future self. It's really easy to like forget to do something like, I'll do that later. And then it bites you in the butt later on when you come back. And so it's like, don't think about today me, think about tomorrow me. Because that if you keep thinking, oh yeah, this is tomorrow me's problem, yeah, it will become a bigger problem then. So I've always liked that little phrase in the back of my head when I'm documenting or anything else. Like, yeah, okay, I want to be lazy right now, but this effort now will really pay off down the road when I come back to this file in 6 months when I need to update it for some reason. Good question. Yep. I know we're at time, so I'll wrap up officially up here, and then I'm going to be hanging out and everything for anybody else who has questions as well. But I want to, again, I appreciate you all for showing up in person today. I really enjoy these events, and I'm happy to start doing them again. So thank you all for coming.